Mark Rogers TV, always analyzing college football. We've certainly had a number of discussions this week among top bloggers and broadcasters across the country on different college football playoff scenarios. What should be considered, what shouldn't. We've laid out a number of scenarios and what should happen versus trying to second guess the College Football Playoff Committee and see what their selections will ultimately be. I'm sure you've joined in with a number of those kind of conversations, but it seems like the one that has captivated most people is the comparison between Alabama and Ohio State. And the reason why is that the SEC is going to produce a winner between Auburn and Georgia. Same with the ACC and Clemson and Miami. Oklahoma is expected to win the Big 12. That leaves one spot. Ohio State's a 5-point favorite against Wisconsin. If the Badgers beat the Buckeyes, of course, they're in. They're 13-0. They're undefeated. Any argument that Wisconsin, because of a weak schedule, should be left out is ridiculous. Here in the last month, they've defeated Iowa, Northwestern, Michigan, and then add to that Ohio State. Wisconsin would be in the college football playoff. But it comes down to the argument that if the Buckeyes do defeat the Badgers, as the odds makers believe they will, then who should get that final playoff spot? Should it be a conference champion in Ohio State with 2 losses, or a team in Alabama that has just 1 loss but didn't make its own conference championship game? Well, let's compare the Buckeyes and the Crimson Tide, because what I've seen on social media all week is that people are citing the awful loss that Ohio State suffered at Iowa City, 55-24. And that's certainly relevant and needs to be weighed in and measured. That was a bad loss against a decent team. Iowa finished at 7-5. They're a good team. They're a decent team. They're one of the top 35 or 40 teams in the nation, but they're not that good. And they blew out the Buckeyes and scored 55 points. But if we're going to rank wins and losses, if we're going to point to one awful loss and say that should really knock down that team, then we need to apply the same criteria to the wins, don't we? And I'll do that in just a second. So I've compared Alabama and Ohio State. And if you compare the losses, there is no comparison between the two teams. Alabama lost once, Ohio State lost twice. Alabama lost against arguably one of the best teams in the country in Auburn, ranked currently 2nd on the road in a game that was competitive midway into the 4th quarter before Alabama lost 26-14. Ohio State was dominated in the second half against Oklahoma. It was a close game. They had a 1-point lead in the 3rd quarter. They blew it. They lost by 15 points to Oklahoma at home. And then, of course, the infamous loss to Iowa, 55-24. Let's look at the quality of play between these two teams. The teams that Alabama played in the Power 5 went 48-47. So I took all the Power 5 teams that Alabama beat. Those teams went 48-47. All the teams that Ohio State beat, this is awfully close, 54-53. So we can't come up with any advantage there. But let's look at the conference play by these two teams. So Alabama played an awful conference schedule. Outside of the SEC Western Division, they played the 2 awful and worst teams in the SEC East. And that's one of the issues that I have with the conference scheduling overall, and I've gone through that a number of times. Alabama missed Georgia. They missed South Carolina. They missed a decent Kentucky team. They played Vanderbilt and Tennessee. Those 2 teams went 1-15 in the SEC. They couldn't have selected 2 better teams to play in the SEC than Tennessee and Vanderbilt. And subsequently, they blew them both out. So the teams that Alabama played in the SEC only went 19-37 in the SEC. And then add in Florida State, the other Power 5 team that Alabama played, and Florida State only 3-5 in the ACC. So all the Power 5 teams that Alabama played only went 22-42 against their conference schedules. Okay, for Ohio State, it's almost just as bad, but it's not nearly that bad. The Big Ten teams that Ohio State played went 29-43. They match up against a difficult Big Ten Eastern Division that does contain the likes of Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana. And then they played 2 awful teams in the Western Division, the teams that they beat, Nebraska and Illinois, and that weighed down Ohio State's wins. Alabama, to its credit, defeated Fresno State and also Colorado State. So those are the group of 5 wins that Alabama has on its resume. Fresno State playing in the Mountain West Championship game tomorrow at 9-3, and Colorado State at 7-5. All right, those are the losses, and that's the overall resume against the quality of those teams overall. But let's look at the wins. We can't just look at the losses. Ohio State's been sabotaged by this 55-24 game, and rightfully so. It needs to be on the record, and they need to take a hit for it. But if you're going to look at the ugliness of the losses, then you also have to look at the quality and the dominance of the wins. Not just the quality of the wins, but if you're going to tag a team for losing ugly and being dominated, then you've got to credit them for dominating a good opponent. So Alabama's 3 best wins: Mississippi State, LSU, and Texas A&M. Mississippi State finished 8-4. They're a fringe top 25 team. LSU is 9-3, and Alabama defeated them 24-10. So LSU is the best win. They're a fringe top 15 team. And then you also have Texas A&M. Texas A&M 7-5, finished under 500 in the SEC. Those are Alabama's best wins, and we could even really toss out Texas A&M. Their 2 best wins are LSU and Mississippi State, 9-3, 8-4. Alabama beat LSU by 2 touchdowns. It was a fairly close game, but they were decidedly the better team. They escaped Mississippi State 31-24. They were down 7 in the fourth quarter, so they did in no way dominate Mississippi State. They escaped in the last 45 seconds of that game. All right. Ohio State is only in this conversation if they beat Wisconsin tomorrow. If they lose that game, obviously, they're done. They're out. They're 10-3. They've got 3 losses. So once Ohio State, if they win the Big Ten championship game, they will have beaten number 4 Wisconsin, number 9 Penn State, number 15 Michigan State, and a Michigan team that at 8-4 is roughly the comparison of Mississippi State. So they will have 4 of those quality wins. They will also have beaten an Army team who's currently at 8-3, who went and beat Duke, who beat 2 bowl teams in the ACC. People don't regard that game as being a quality win, but I'm just taking that of note. And that's roughly the comparison of Alabama defeating Fresno State and Colorado State. So get this. Ohio State with 2 wins over the top 10, Wisconsin and Penn State. And then in the comparison that I made with the bad loss against Iowa and crediting the dominant wins, Ohio State beat Michigan State, a team that's ranked 15th in the country that went 9-3. They beat them 48-3. So if Ohio State's going to get knocked for the 55-24 loss, they need to get dominant credit for the overwhelming win over Michigan State 48-3. They didn't squeeze by Michigan State. They trounced them 48-3. That is unlike what Alabama has on its resume against Mississippi State and LSU. So who's got the better losses? No question. Alabama only has 1, and it was to Auburn. Ohio State trounced at Iowa, also lost to an Oklahoma team that most people consider to be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the country, but they were not competitive in the fourth quarter. But the wins aren't even close. Alabama beat 2 really good teams and 1 decent team in Texas A&M, and they had marginal efforts against them. They were decidedly the better team, but they squeaked out a win against Texas A&M and especially against Mississippi State. Ohio State, Wisconsin, Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, and Michigan State being comparable to Mississippi State and LSU, and Ohio State with the dominant 48-3 win in that one. Alabama and Ohio State, as I said last year, after Penn State was snubbed in favor of the Buckeyes as the 1-loss non-conference champion, I believe in conference championships. I believe that if Ohio State wins the Big Ten, like I stated last year with Penn State, they should go to the college football playoff. Would love to hear from you. Leave your comments right here on Mark Rogers TV.